Hello, beautifuls. You're listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Brooke Thomas, and I'll be joined soon by my very dear friend and co-host, Vanessa Scotto. On the show, we're talking about being students on the embodied spiritual path, and what does that even mean? What's a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything, all the beauty and crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life? We're attempting to sort that out for ourselves here on the show. Today's episode is the first of what we hope will be many, where we answer a listener's question. As you may recall, we did a couple of episodes on self-love, and afterwards we got a very thoughtful question asking, essentially, well, what about selfless love? Vanessa and I, as usual, have a lot to say about what we often define as selfless love and what true self-love and selfless love really are. As Vanessa says in the episode, quote, all love technically is selfless. We have a lot to chew on here. If you're enjoying the show, we would be totally delighted if you left a review on iTunes or on our Facebook page, which is Bliss and Grit. You can also head over to blissandgrit.com and subscribe. This is brand new. We just set this up to hear updates on any upcoming events we have coming up and that kind of thing. And the standard disclaimer, we have potty mouths, so if you've got the children's around, put on some headphones. Okay, here we go. Hello. So today we're doing something a little different. As you heard in the intro, we've been receiving a lot of really lovely, thoughtful, and beautiful questions from all of you via emails and a lot of times through Facebook. So feel free to get us there. So we wanted to start doing a bunch of episodes that we're calling the Dear Bliss and Grit episodes, where we can answer questions. And today, I'm very excited, is our first one. So I'm going to read the question, and then Vanessa and I will dive in. Okay. Being an American expat, let's do this thing. Being an American expat gives me such a different perspective on Americans and on your talks. Americans are often viewed from here as being self-absorbed and, quote, it's all about me. And unfortunately, self-love can be seen in this negative way. I would say people in my new country often put other people first, and that being selfless is a quality that people admire here. For example, you never make yourself a cup of tea without asking everyone else if they would like one. Every single time I worked with some American university students here, and after living here for some time, I could not believe how selfish they were. If we were all one, then living for others and in the service of others is admirable, and it may make the world a better place being selfless. However, my closest friend here died of cancer earlier this year. At her funeral, she was praised as being, quote, selfless. She always put other people's needs first. She was lovely. But I think that this is what led to her demise. I trace her illness back to her lack of self-care and really her selflessness. So that's a quick and simple summary of my thoughts. No offense to Americans. I love my country and its people, except for the orange monster and his cronies who are about to take over. Would love to hear you guys tackle all of this because I really see two sides to it. Okay, so thank you so much for sending in that beautiful question. I wrote back to her on Facebook, which I'll get into that, for the sake of the episode. But I'm wondering if instead of me kind of diving in on the thoughts I already had a chance to percolate on, if you have something you want to say straight up, Vanessa.
That's a beautiful question, isn't it? And I think it's a nuanced one, actually, because we did an episode on self-love and this question came in after that. So it means we haven't really discussed all the nuances of what it means to love oneself and love others. And I remember when I went to CIIS to take like an exploratory class. It was before I had even chosen the school, and I went for a weekend. I was sitting in a class, I think it was about Taoism and psychology. And the teacher said, there's a difference between being selfish and self-loving. And I was like, whoa. I know this like the simplest, stupidest statement to hear, like, of course, but I actually did not know that in my system. The way that I had grown up, the way that I was wired was that if I was like attending to myself, I was selfish, especially when, let's say, I had to attend to myself at the cost of someone else being upset or disappointed or going without something. So I think it's a really important exploration to start to look at what is selfish, what is self-centered, where does it kind of go off the rails into a problematic or pathological terrain versus what is self-care and self-loving, and how does that love that one has for itself actually feed the universality and take care of other people. And really, what would that look like behaviorally? Because what she mentioned in this letter was also like behaviors that reflect these things in action. So am I making sense? I guess there's a couple of things. It's like, where's the motivation coming from? How do we understand self-love versus selfishness? And what would that look like behaviorally?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And it's right where I went when I wrote back to her. So I'll mention the two examples I gave to her because immediately they came to mind as demonstrating what people might describe as selfless love coming from a self-loving place versus from a not self-loving place. So the first image that came to mind, I was like, okay, what is something that people in my life, my experience, that would classically and typically look to everyone from the outside as a selfless act of love? And we can all come up with tons of examples of that, even super simple things like giving my dog a bowl of water is actually, it's like he needs water. Here's your water. But the image that came to mind was when my grandmother, who was really beloved to me, was dying of cancer, actually. She was the other artist in the family and I was the artist in the family. So we had always grown up kind of really close. She was an activist for Native American rights and she was just like this weird bird in my family. So we totally were tight. And she was dying of cancer when I was in college. So I went to be with her when she was in hospice and I was there when she died. So I was there for the very end. And I was there for probably a week, sitting bedside and just like putting cool cloths on her forehead, and she couldn't drink anymore. And she just wasn't able to speak. She wasn't lucid. She wasn't herself. And so I was putting little drops of water on her tongue from a straw, where I could dose out the drop because she couldn't drink, but that just soothed her. And so people would look at that and say, wow, how selfless. But it was exactly what I wanted to be doing in that moment. It was like a movement of self-loving. The most loving thing I could do for myself in that moment was that everything in me wanted to move towards just being there with my beloved grandmother while she died. There wasn't a question. Even though I had to leave college and interrupt my studies to go and be there, it didn't feel like I was sacrificing anything because it was 100% exactly what I wanted to do. So in that case, the motivation was derived from like a genuine love, let's say. And then the other example that I gave of something that people might call selfless that did not come from a self-loving place was growing up with my mother, who was an alcoholic until I was 16. And she's given me permission to talk about this on air in case you guys are like, so she's been sober a long time now, 25 years. But growing up until 16, I had to take care of her a lot. And I had to take care of my younger brother a lot, more than a normal sibling relationship would be anyway. And so someone could say that was what a selfless kid who cares enough about her mother who has alcoholism and her younger brother to really step in and do this. But I was just pouring myself into the bottomless hole that is any addiction. It was codependency. It was enabling, and it was harming everybody. Everyone was being harmed by what I might have considered at that time my selfless act of love. Because I didn't give my mom agency to either just live her life with her addiction or turn it around. I didn't give my brother agency to be a person in the world. I kind of put him away on his own little separate island from the whole family. I would visit him on the island, but the way I thought he was safe was to not see any of the chaos or drama. And I wasn't a person. I was just pouring myself into this go nowhere situation. And when I was 16, long story short, I just completely was done. And I just decided like the last straw had broke. And I said, I'm not doing this anymore. And what I meant genuinely was, I'm not doing this anymore. And it was when I gave up on my mother because I knew that I had to turn towards myself, or else I was going to meet my own demise from trying to repair this situation that wasn't mine. I was able to take care of myself, shift, change, and grow. My mom, not everyone would make this decision, but my mom did make the decision at that moment to get sober and has stayed sober since then. So I'm not saying everybody gets the hooray Pollyanna story at the end, but regardless, that was all of her own volition and her own agency for the 25 years she's been sober now. I don't have anything to do with that. That's hers. That's her work. My brother, like our whole family, it was one of those crazy things, like our whole family unit repaired. My dad came back to the family unit and he was still living with us, but I mean, emotionally came back. My brother started to feel like he was in the family and not just on the safe imaginary island I was keeping him on. And so that was an example of like selfless love gone really wrong. So 2 examples. And I feel like this is where we have to always pay attention to the what's true, like what's genuinely sourced from love and a movement of love, as opposed to, you know, in the case of my mother, it was like fear and grief and anger and worry and despair and all that stuff. That it wasn't love.
Well, those were 2 pretty powerful examples. I feel like we could have like a mic drop moment and scene, and that's the episode. So, you know, what more can you say after that? But I do think that, as you say, starting to identify the motivation even within yourself, you know, so I guess on a very basic level, there's acts of etiquette and politeness. Like in this case, the person wrote about making a cup of tea. You know, there's like the holding a door open for someone. And that's very kind and that's very nice. And would we call that selfless love? You know, I don't think I would qualify it in those kinds of ways. I mean, someone could make a tea because that was a habit taught to them, whereas someone else could be the most generous soul and that just wasn't something that they were ever exposed to, not like a certain way of behaving. So on some level, I think we have to look at societal norms, right? Like what is culturally taught to us. So there are behaviors that we're just passing on, but I don't think that's where like the juicy stuff is. It's like, yes, I didn't learn to share my food very well. I was the youngest and I didn't like it. And I was the first person to eat a piece of gum and like not think to ask someone else if they wanted one, which some people found really obnoxiously annoying. But you know what? I didn't think of it, you know, and then when someone told me, I did. And it wasn't exactly I'm a selfish person or I have great boundaries. It was like complete ignorance to dynamics. Okay. But here's something that comes up in my mind. I don't know if I ever talked about it on this show. Maybe I did in the self-love episode. It makes me think of the state of reverse narcissism that I sometimes pander on about. Have I talked about reverse narcissism?
We've talked about it a little. I can't remember which episode. But
okay,
yeah.
Well,
let's
you know,
revisit.
Upshot is
it's critically important. Yeah.
It's so important. It's like you think you're the very worst. So it's like the trance of unworthiness, reverse narcissism. You think you are the very worst person ever, the least lovable, the least deserving, perhaps even the most punished by God and life, you know, it's out to get you. Now, in that state, that trance of unworthiness, what I found for myself, and then I see it with clients, is you are stuck in a self-referencing bubble. So you can kind of picture yourself like drawn inside a circle. And everything that's coming in that circle from the outside, you keep bouncing around in the circle. So it's like, what does this have to do with me? So like a very typical example, I remember this moment. I was in grad school. I was walking down the hallway. I see a friend of mine, but kind of a new friend. So I don't know for sure that she loves me, not like the way I know Brooke loves me. It's like, but I really like her and I see her and I smile and she kind of like looks at me and looks away. Now, in that moment, in my self-referencing bubble, I guess I remember this because I remember seeing my thoughts like go spinning around. It was like, what did I do? What does this have to do with me? Right? Like all of those kinds of things. Now, in that moment of woundedness, of I am the worst, of like pinging my I am unlovable belief, it was all self-centered thinking. It was like, what does this have to do with me? What does this mean for me? right? And in that motion, there was never a motion of, oh my God, my friend, is she okay?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever could be wrong? Because that's not like her, right? And so you can see from the very foundation of how my belief systems were operating and how my pain body was operating, it kind of deluded me so that I wouldn't have been able to show up in an act of selfless love. I was in self-centered mode. And one of the things I noticed, I don't know if you've seen this too, Brooke, I notice this in working with people sometimes, almost like when they've been really insecure and when they've been plagued by unlovable beliefs, when they're first beginning to work on themselves, they go to therapy or they're, I don't know, doing whatever self-help of their choice. The first thing I notice is they can almost get like, I don't know how to say this in a PC way, like obnoxiously rude. Like everything does come about them because they're like, it's finally my turn and I'm going to like do everything for me. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's like their boundaries get like super ridiculously terse. And it is kind of a very self-gratifying stance that I think is, again, yet another defensive motion. It's not truth either. So
yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is there are these places within ourselves, you know, when our belief systems are active and our pain bodies are turned on, where we can get A, very stuck in a self-referencing bubble, and B, we can become quite selfish and deem it as self-loving. But in the act of loving oneself, in my experience, when it's really true, the other isn't obfuscated. Like, they're still there. It's like a rightness that exists for all beings. It's not just it's finally my time and it's a big fat fuck you to the rest of you.
Right.
I don't know. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's not a genuine self-love. So I think that the differentiation between selfish and self-love is important. And of course, you know, we did our whole 2 episodes on self-love.
Oh, gosh, right. 2 episodes.
Yeah. So we've covered it all, which is awesome. I'm so glad we nailed it.
And if y'all haven't figured it out by now, I don't know.
But I think one of the things that I find fascinating, so if we're referencing from our ego mind, our thinking mind, our identity that we've crafted, then we look at self-love over there. And we assume that if we're in a self-loving place, that we're automatically going to be super fucking selfish, which is a really weird assumption to make. You know, like if I'm loving myself and doing what's nourishing and good for me, that would never include things like taking care of my son, taking care of my dog, being with my dying grandmother, washing the dishes. Like, it would just not include those things because, like you gave this perfect example of it, because it's my time. I matter. I'm important and I deserve what I deserve and I deserve nourishment. But that's just this crazy story that the ego's telling you. The truth is that the more we can love ourselves, the more we can connect with what's genuine. And what's genuine is very, 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 very frequently what's also loving for others. You know, it's very pleasurable for me to be the mother to my son, even when he's making me insane and I've told him 20 times that he needs to do his homework. It's very pleasurable for me to be in that role. It's what I want. I want to be having the endless homework conversation with my son. So it's this funny delusion that we operate under, that if we it's the dualistic thing. Like, we have to pick a team. You know, I'm going to pick team selfless love and empty myself out into other people's needs for the rest of my life. Or I'm going to pick team self-love and I'm going to be a selfish asshole and elbow everyone else out of the way. It's like, no, those are just crazy, weird, delusional endpoints that some people live in some of the time. But there's the whole range of experience in between that involves genuineness. And genuineness involves, I think involves mostly love, acting from love towards yourself and towards others.
Yeah. And I think people ping back and forth in reaction to those two patterns. So what I mean is, like, let's say you had a parent that was totally selfish. You're going to be the opposite of them, and you'll be really selfless, and you'll give and give and give. Or let's say at some point in your life, you were the person who gives and gives and gives. You're not going to do that anymore. And you're going to be the person who has boundaries, right? Like they're all kind of reactionary stances, which is very different than an embodied, like, unclench, like what feels right. It's very different than recognizing sacredness and preciousness in everything, which is what I think really self-love is. If you want to take self-love from this spiritual level, like we talked about before, but it's not some list of just these wonderful pros and cons that are Vanessa. It's just the meanness that exists in this, like, divine play. Like, holy cow, how the fuck did that happen? It's magnificent, and it's right the way a tree is right. Just right. The way the stars are just right. And we love them. And that's what the self-love is. And when you're open to that, it's this embodied place. And you're not selfish. Like, I had a Buddhist teacher once talk about a story, because, his thought, like, I don't know if you all know, but in metta meditation and loving kindness meditation, it's a classical Buddhist meditation. You're always wishing, may others be happy, may others know peace, may others be well. And you'll wish it not only for the people that you love, but you'll wish it for your enemies, to the people that you think are doing harm in this world, literally. And it's got a very sound thought process, which is that if you're happy, you're naturally going to act differently. You're going to spread the wealth. Like, people who genuinely know inner contentment, inner peace, self-love, then what is there to be afraid of? And what is there to be judgmental of? And that they said, like, this teacher said, let's say, like, you're sitting at a feast, right? And you have all the food in the world. Like, you have as much food as you could ever want. And you're sitting at a table with people who are starving. You're naturally going to want to share.
Right.
Right? Like, you're not going to be like, sorry, suckers, there'll be no pleasure.
It's my turn.
In that. So that's the movement of love that arises from happiness. Now, the way to be happy is to recognize that you are sacred. And you are precious, and you are meant to be, right, as you are, and you're meant to exist in giving that space. So that's self-love. Now, from that place of actually loving yourself and recognizing your inherent worth, you see it in others, and you recognize they're majestic and they're sacred, and you're all connected. And then I feel like you're free to make choice. So it's like you were describing with your grandmother. For someone else in that situation, in that moment, there may have been a different choice.
Totally. Of course.
Right. But it's choice that arises naturally and feels right. Prior to the moment of loving yourself enough to rest in yourself so you can acknowledge choice, you can get caught in things like martyrdom.
Mm-hmm. Victimization, or like an identity with being the victim, or the one that just gives and gives and gives. The ego doesn't care what the identity is. It just wants one. It just as soon be the top of the world, what we normally think of as ego-identified narcissist type, as the poor me, I can't even afford shoes, I gave all my belongings away type. Doesn't care which, just wants one.
I don't know how you feel about this. I don't know if you've ever noticed this in yourself, but during my phase of being the most selfless in my love, I'm so thoughtful and I give so much and I never get back, which was, I don't know, my 20s to my early 30s, I would say. I was exhausted all of the time. Mm-hmm. I really kind of resented people, like, let's say, for example, I didn't charge enough to a client. And then I really put a lot of energy in, and then I may feel like a little pissy. And I knew well enough not to be mad at them. I didn't let the anger move towards them, but it was like a reflection, right? Like, it was a reflection of, I have no boundaries. I have no self-care. I'm not tending to myself. And I noticed, let's say, with my mother, for example, someone who I was highly codependently wired to. So it's like, I felt very responsible, still do, hashtag, to what she felt and what she needed. And her very happiness and well-being was dependent upon Vanessa Scotto, right? So I'm going to do everything I can for her. Whatever she asks, I'm going to give it to her because I don't want my mom to suffer, right? But like, how am I giving it to her? I'm giving it to her like, she's so annoying. And I'm giving it to her and I'm exhausted, and I'm giving it to her and I'm like frustrated and I'm guilt ridden. And it's like, who am I doing a favor for then? You know, maybe I satiated something within her for a moment, but as we are all connected, she feels that. She feels my resentment and my walls against her, like the places where I don't even want her around because she's going to ask me for something and I will have to selflessly give it even though it's not right for me. I'm trapped by that. So then her and I like spin around. So this idea of selflessly giving has to really be checked against where the motivation is coming from. You know, is it this exhale place of rightness? Like, it is just a pleasure, you know, like, I don't know, Brooke came to visit me in San Francisco. I think she told the story about this. And I'm like, what would be your delight today? Can I make you a cup of coffee?
Ever. What's the most delightful thing you could possibly think of to do today? This was my post-divorce trip, by the way, for those of you listening, which was like the sweetest gift ever. It was so great.
Would you like a latte, or what will be your pleasure in coffee? And it's like, that is not selfless. It just is, you know, I guess just is. It's just rightness. It's just pleasure. But if I was all caught up with having to do the right thing or the kind thing or the etiquette-y thing, or having to make sure I don't overuse my boundaries because I'm too weak that way, any of that would have distorted the action. And I think that's some of what we're getting at, is that all love technically is selfless.
Yeah.
So what we're really looking at is where these movements are coming from, and also what seeds are you planting. So, you know, if we think about karma, the idea with karma is that it's not only the action that plants the seed, it's the intention and motivation.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
and that's where the powerful stuff comes.
Yeah, that's the real deal. That's the fuel that you're using. Yeah.
So here I am, and I'm a healer. I'm an acupuncturist, and I work for the betterment of people. And I'm doing so much for my parents, and I'm trying to be a good daughter, and I'm trying to be a good wife, and I'm doing what I can for my friends, right? All of these things, but I'm absolutely exhausted. I feel trapped. I feel a little resentful. I feel like I'm not getting back like the money, the resources, the support I need. And all of that is fueling my actions. So guess what karma I create?
Yeah, exactly. Just more resentment, more tired, more desperation, more not enough for them, not enough for me.
More friends who need you to give from that level because they actually don't want to give you back. And so they're cropping up all over the place.
And the clients who are like, couldn't you just, I'm sorry, I forgot to pay today, and all of that.
All that good stuff.
Yeah. So I feel like you're getting at like a couple of really important points that I just want to highlight. One is, when we do the dualistic thing and we pick a team, martyr, selfless love, I'm the generous one, you instantly make other people the bad other in your world, unconsciously and implicitly based on your role. Because you are the good one, they have to be the bad one who is whatever the story is.
Or the one who needs saving.
Right. They're so needy. They're so helpless. They're so obnoxious. They're so greedy. They're so, they can't take care of themselves. You have a story about that you're projecting on them based on wanting to keep whatever you've decided you are, which is in this case, selfless love, martyr, right? So that is not helpful or loving to people in your world at all, because you're making them bad. Unconsciously. Okay. We do these things unconsciously. This isn't a shame talk. We've all done it, but it's great to see it and unhook from it. And then the other point that I think that you're getting at that's really critical is that if you want to see more selfless love in the world, and I think that we all do, that it cannot be sourced from an empty tank. The empty tank so quickly turns into the martyr story, or I'm the good one, they're the bad one, it just spirals into that place. So for there to be enough, not because there's an actual quantity, but because our identity has decided there's an actual quantity. We have to experience genuine nourishment in our own lives. We have to spend time with friends who are respectful of us and helpful and who just love us, and who are more than happy to bring over the casserole when you break your ankle or whatever. We need to spend more time with those people so that there's this ecosystem of genuine, selfless love. And that's where everyone gets to win. And I think that we've all experienced having friends who have a very hard time receiving. And what a gift it is when you want to give someone genuine, selfless love or care. They're saying, yes, thank you, is the biggest gift they can possibly give you. So when we all become less defended and more receptive, it just becomes this exchange. It's like breathing in and breathing out. It just happens. It's not, you don't have to think about it. Nobody has to sacrifice anything for anybody. You just move in that direction. It's like falling in love. I've said this before too. When you fall in love with someone, romantic love, it's not hard, and you don't think it out and you don't plan it out. You're just like, I want to spend all my time with you, love you, I think you're the cutest thing ever. That's what you want.
Yeah. You're naturally called into certain exchanges, and it's not very thought out. There's no strategy or manipulation or shoulds. I was thinking of trees too. They emit oxygen. We breathe it in. We emit CO2. They breathe it in. And there's no fuss about it. It's not like, oh, I'm so great, I'm giving you that CO2. And it's not like, oh, no, I can't possibly take in all that oxygen. I don't deserve it. It's just, and that's really the cycle. Like you said, inhale, exhale. When we're in a state of health and reality and sanity, there's always a give and receive. There's always a give and receive. I do want to also bring this back to, because I think in our dear reader's question, she was wondering about the implications of overgiving in terms of health, specifically, of course, in terms of health and maybe in terms of well-being in general. And I think it would be useful for us just to touch on that if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think that would be great. For me, the example I gave of when I was 16 and I was just like, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to, and I didn't say it in this way in my head at the time. I was 16, but I'm not going to enable my mother anymore. In my head, it was like, I'm not going to take care of her anymore. It's because I knew I was going to die if I kept doing it. There was no more rope for me to have. And people will reach the end of their rope in all kinds of circumstances, and they'll keep trying to pour something into that black hole. And I really do believe that is what makes us sick, not 100% of the time, but it's one of the ways that we get very ill, and oftentimes with things like cancer, and this is an opinion of mine, but I really don't think I'm alone in this opinion.
Yeah, there was did you ever read the book Dying to Be Me by Anita Moorjani?
No.
For any of you who are interested in this topic, this woman had she was dying. Really dying, in the hospital, family called, dying. And she has this near-death experience, hovering, the whole works. And she essentially sees that the reason why she was so sick was she didn't love herself. And this woman was spoken about by Wayne Dyer. She's published. There's she includes doctor's reports and hospital records of how sick she was. And she actually came out of remission. So just for anyone who's interested on the topic, you can go ahead and read. And I always hate categorizing everything because, I feel like, you and I've spoken, like The Secret, it can always go back to people feeling bad and to shame and
totally,
and I just don't believe life is simplistic. But what I do know is that we can make some really poor decisions for ourselves that way. And so for example, a couple of episodes back, I was talking about my health issues that have been happening. So I'm getting sick in Miami. Turns out I have a mold illness. I'm reacting to my environment. So I'm sick, like it's taking a toll and it's like, I should leave, right? Simple, common sense, like you're getting sick, leave your environment. I work from home. I have all the options in the world. But I am wired in attachment to my parents in a very codependent way, and it will upset them. And so I've been stuck, right? So here we have this very typical example of how love can go. There's a belief system underlying my stuckness that like love equals sacrifice, like that's normal, right? Not that, hey, this is abnormal and no one who loves you needs you to sacrifice your life, your energy, your well-being. It's so normal. It's unquestionably normal that love equals sacrifice. So as that underlying belief, which is, by the way, so pervasive, Kieran and I spoke about this and she was like, for any of you who are Christian, like, look what Christ had to do, for his Father and for the world. We're built on this idea that we sacrifice, right? So in that moment, I stay. And it's not that I don't think I'm deserving of love. That's not quite right. It's just that the way that the wiring is lined up is it's selfish to hurt people. And so selfish that I'd rather sacrifice for them. And this is really, although I hate to admit it, a bit of a martyr complex. Like, take my blood if you must. I will die in the tropics of, whatever, fungal attack. And so there are these insidious ways that these patterns play out. Now, it does a few things. One is it keeps me in conditions that aren't good for me. By the way, I'm getting out. Nobody worry about me. It's all fine. But like, it keeps me in conditions that aren't good for me. Right. And if I didn't have the awareness practices that I have and the kinds of support that I have, and I don't know how long it would go before I was willing to acknowledge this, because these core patterns are so core that to like go against my parents is to die or be the like most shameful human being in the world, like states I don't want to occupy. So if I didn't have my awareness practices and support, good chances I don't see it. Right. And then I pretend like it's not happening. Like the way that we work is so trippy because it's like somehow I never seem to read about mold. Someone keeps mentioning it. It's going in one ear, out the other. Like we do these very peculiar defenses to the beliefs where we don't acknowledge what's really happening to us so that we don't have to confront that selfish act that feels terrible to us. So I think that's one way we get sick is we keep ourselves in predicaments and circumstances. Like I even just had a client tell me that she was miserable at her job, crying every day for 6 to 8 weeks, but had to stay because she didn't want to get into it with her mother.
Yeah, we do this shit all the time.
All the time. That is, by the way, like the third client this week who said something like that, So it's all of us, not all of us, God bless you, who don't have that wiring, but it's many of us who have this wiring around selfishness and sacrifice and love. So it's one way. And then, of course, on a physiological level, to not love oneself, to overgive and not receive, it is on a basic level overusing your resources. On a very basic level, it is a depletion mode, right? And we keep exhausting ourselves and we're bearing stuff on our shoulders, the weight of the world, it's up to me and I'm responsible, and we're draining ourselves and draining ourselves. And yes, that can contribute to immune system deficiencies. It can contribute to illness. And there was one other thing I was going to say about this cycle and health. But easy come, easy go. So if it's meant to be, it'll come back. But I think that's how we can get stuck in these cycles where yes, not loving ourselves. Oh, I got it. And being in complete resistance to ourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, what kind of effect do you think it has on the body to constantly badger and criticize and beat the shit out of yourself?
Yeah, which is what we're all doing 99% of the time. Whoever of us is not fully awakened, right? Like, so there's also no shame in it. Like, it's actually a part of the human condition that some of us are on a path to try and unhook from. So it's okay that you have the crazy talk in your head, because we all have the crazy talk in our head. And we spend a lot of time believing that it's true. Normal human condition. But all of this work of awareness, meditation, just trying to see, like you were saying, like if you didn't have all this stuff that you're up to about awareness and meditating, you have teachers, you have mentors, you have community, the odds that you would understand that this health issue is about a whole bunch of stuff going on that's environmental and physiological. And it's also about you being up against, as a gift from God, your deepest core wounding, some of it, some piece of it, that you need to sacrifice yourself for your family members to be okay, and that you're willing to do that. Like, it's all in a big bundle. And none of these things, again, like I can't emphasize this enough, and I'll say it every freaking episode. We cannot make things black and white, good and bad. And we have to catch ourselves when we do it the bajillions of times a day that I do, that we all do. Because it's the go nowhere train, so I'm so glad you talked about your experience and all this nuance that goes on on the middle way path of just seeing all the veils of conditioning, all the stories, all the beliefs. And that's the truth of it. So I want to put a point on what you said, because I think it's super important. And a lot of people who suffer in particular with cancer right now are getting this extra attack. Not only are you suffering with cancer, you're getting this extra attack that it's your fault. It's your fault because you didn't think happy thoughts. It's your fault because
you didn't love yourself enough. Why couldn't you?
Why can't you? And that's what we do when we divide everything into the good team and the bad team, is that everything becomes punitive and nobody wins. So we are not having the crazy talk in our heads because we choose it. We are not having conditioning that has us act out things that are not maybe in our highest good because we choose it. All of these things are unconscious patterns that run in us in our lives and that run in our species for thousands of years. So it's a collective issue, and it's about more than just turn that smile upside down or it's your fault. So I really, really, especially for any of you who are dealing with illness, it's not because you're bad or you fucked up or you need to figure out how to get it right. It's going to be exactly what Vanessa's describing. It's going to be your individual, unique path of bringing hopefully as much loving awareness as you can possibly muster to the situation, and then just seeing what it tells you, seeing what happens, not because you need to fix it and not because you need to heal yourself or any of those end game things, but just because it's what's up for you. So thank you, Vanessa, so much for talking about your personal experience and for bringing up that issue. Oh, and a book, which I will put in resources for anyone who is dealing with the turn that front upside down stuff while going through cancer treatment, which I love, is called Bright Sided by Barbara Ehrenreich. And I love that book. Thank you so much for listening to today's show. The show notes, including any of the resources we mentioned, live as always at blissandgrit.com. You can also come chat with us and follow along on social media. We are frequently and usually at Instagram and Facebook, and we're Bliss and Grit at both of those spots. If you want to support the show, you can write us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or newly on our Facebook page, which is Bliss and Grit. We also have a new subscribe form on the website, which the site is blissandgrit.com. You can sign up there if you want to stay in touch with what goodies we have brewing for the community. That way you'll be notified as soon as we have things coming out. And thank you so much to all of you who have written to us already on Facebook messaging and via email. We are setting up a dedicated email for Bliss and Grit so that we can do more episodes like this and so that we can just more easily chat. So that's coming soon, I promise. And thank you for all the feedback so far. And of course, huge gratitude to all of you who have written reviews already. Here's one from Canada, from Andrew BA11. Thank you, Brooke and Vanessa, for dialoguing together with such authenticity and insight. I find great solace in listening to you both share your perspective on living an embodied spiritual path. I particularly love how you both remain so authentic and often hilarious in your voices while shedding such light and wisdom on our contemporary lives and the many layers of the human experience. Thank you for your work, your questions, your vulnerability, and the space you hold for each other and all of us who tune in. I look forward to following along with this podcast as it and your community grows. Thank you so much. That was very sweet, and we really, really appreciate it. And we'll be back next week.